Okay. Okay, good morning, Council. We're just going to reconvene the public hearing. So I'm going to call the public hearing of December 18th to order. Clerk, can we have the roll call, please?
Mayor Stewart in the chair, Councillor Carr, Councillor DeGenova, Councillor Fry, Councillor Swanson, Councillor Hardwick, not in the chamber, Councillor Wiebe, Councillor Boyle, not in the chamber, Councillor Dominato is on leave today from 10:30 until 12:30 and not in the chamber presently, Councillor Bly. Councillor Kirby-Young, not in the chamber, the meeting has quorum.
Thank you very much. Before we begin, of course, I'd like to acknowledge we're on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and thank them for having cared for this land and are enjoying working with them as we build this great city together. I want to thank our great staff who are here the long hours with us often, and thanks for all your great work. And again, just a reminder that those in the gallery, please refrain from addressing council members without permission or applauding, interrupting the council or those who are speaking to council, and please respect the directions of the chair. So are we going to read the application again, or do we? No. Okay, so on Tuesday, last night, we concluded hearing from speakers and closed the speakers list and receipt of public comments. We'll now hear closing comments. Would the applicant like to make any closing comments? Okay, can we just move you over to the mic? And so then you get on the broadcast.
I really don't have a lot to say. Just like to thank everybody for their time and consideration of our proposal, and have a restful, enjoyable, safe holiday with your family. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, staff have any closing comments? Sorry, we'll just get your mic on there. And there we go.
Thank you. No closing comments from staff other than to say thank you for all the speakers who came out and spoke.
Okay, thank you. Now, questions for staff. Councillor DeGenova, I have you on the list.
I do have a question for staff. Okay. There was a speaker last night who lived in a home that was adjacent to the property that we're considering right now, or the application, I should say, that we're considering right now. I heard from that speaker that they were guaranteed by staff. They said that staff said that that this property that we're considering here would never be anything but RT8. Is that true? Is that, and I understand it was a heritage designation, but that was the exact wording that I had from the speaker. So I think they're referencing a specific zoning type, and I was just hoping that maybe staff could comment on whether or not that was true. I mean, we often hear of stories about people who purchase apartments and they aren't sure or they thought that they'd always have a view and they were mistaken by that. I'm just wondering if in this case there was any information that staff could provide, that there was any guarantee given that this was the zoning that would remain to the owner of the home with the heritage designation next door. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. There are no covenants on the church site or in fact on the surroundings immediate areas. So at any point in time, the zoning is in place, but if council adopts new policies that override that, and in this case, this is what the MRC policy allows for consideration for these properties to land throughout Vancouver, depending on their location and their context. So there are no legal conditions around this subject site that would restrict it from changing its zoning.
Thank you. And also just wondering if you're aware, because there was a statement made about staff comments to that person. There's no, you don't have any knowledge of a staff person who did say we would never consider anything else for this
No, I can pretty much guarantee you that no one in the planning department
Okay.
would say that, because we understand we're at the discretion of council to amend and change policies as the city evolves.
So another question would be, you could say this is the current zoning, however,
It is
it's
always subject to change.
change.
That's right.
Okay. But there was no guarantee made that it would stay. Thank you. That really helps. Also had a question on MERP and the rents specifically. I'd asked a speaker who I heard describe rental, that there was a lot of rental of this. I suppose that would have 2-bedroom units in the neighborhood. I think they were referencing secondary suites, but when asked, well, would this be a new type of building form, they said no. But then on the other hand, what I heard was, yes, it would be new, and that's why it might not fit, but it wasn't new, as in there was already enough housing of that type with lower rents. Is that correct? Or is this a neighborhood that is what we would consider deficient in family housing in the MERP sort of income bands?
Dan, do you want to take that question?
Thought I'd give him a minute to. There we go. Thanks.
Hi, good morning. Dan Garrison from Housing Policy and Regulation and Planning. Certainly, Kitsilano is a neighborhood that has a significant amount of rental supply. There's over 9,000 purpose-built rental units in Kitsilano. Most of them are, as you know, older, built in the 60s and 70s. And as you know, the vacancy rate in Kitsilano is very low, as it is across the city. So certainly the need for new rental housing is pretty clear. In terms of the rents and availability in secondary rental, we don't have very good data on secondary rental. We know the general number of secondary suites that are in the city. In terms of data, CMHC doesn't really collect good data on the rents in that stock. There are a number of people who do what they call scrapes of Craigslist and try to figure out what those rents are, but there are challenges with the consistency in reporting on that data. So it is a sort of a data gap. What we do know is that across our rental spectrum, where we do look at secondary rental in, for example, the condominium stock, where CMHC does have better data, we know that consistently vacancy rates are low, and so the need for this type of housing, and particularly family rental housing that rent at more affordable rents, is really severe.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I'll go on for more questions if that's okay, Mr. Mayor.
No problem. Councillor Bly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have a couple of questions. We heard from a number of speakers around about the 4-story building across the street from the site, and that it is about 35 feet lower, but only 1 story lower than the proposal. And I'm just wondering if we can get some context of how that fleshes out. Hi. I just have a few questions, so.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Grace Jiang from Development Planner. There is an old building, apartment building, 4-story, right across this site, which is built to approximately 37 feet. And it's built under the old industrial standard, which has a lower floor-to-floor height, which is about 9 feet, and also the ground floor slightly sunken into the below the grade. And the current proposal, which in the CD1 is 67 feet, but the building itself is 5-story building, and because of the side slope and also the rooftop amenity space above the 5th floor, so it's at the building height up to the 67 feet. Actually, this measured to the top of the amenity space, which is significantly set back from the all edges of the roof. You hardly barely can see this massing. The effectively building height measured from street level is 50 feet high, which comparable to the neighbor's building across large is about a story higher, which is 5-story building. Further than that, this building, you can see the 5th floors also set back from the streets and make the appearance looks like a 4-story. And this is make this building more compatible to the 4-story building across the streets.
That's perfect. That's a really good answer for an explanation of why there's a difference between the two. Thank you. If I may move on with some other questions, that's helpful. We heard also that MERP is earmarked, I think, quote unquote, for arterials. I wonder if staff could comment on, from a policy perspective, is that true?
Hi. So, thanks for the question. So the MERP program, it specifies the types of areas where we would be looking at rezoning applications under the program. Certainly some of those are on arterial streets. It is sort of a build-on the Rental 100 program, which has typically over the past 10 years been arterially focused. But intentionally, one of the things we wanted to do coming out of Housing Vancouver, where we heard from a lot of residents about the concerns about all the new rental being built on arterials and limited options for renters off arterials, we wanted to create some opportunities to look at the delivery of rental housing in other types of conditions and locations. And so we included in the MERP pilot the opportunity to do what you couldn't do at the time through Rental 100, which was look at RS and RT sites, which were off arterial streets, particularly looking at relatively unique opportunities where there are larger sites already assembled.
Okay, that's really great. Thank you. Last question is, what do we know about the land economics for this site? We've heard a lot about, that the church is a valued amenity space, as if it could have stuck around or it could have been replaced with something similar, and or to Mr. Benge's comments last night and providing some examples of what else could be built there. We haven't heard back in terms of, is this actually viable? Would it be? Yeah.
Thank you for the question. We have to remember that we presented a project that's under the MERP program, and that is aligned with Council's goals of meeting that missing middle and hitting a rental target that's within $30,000 a year and $80,000 in income. In order to do that, it generates density.
Can I ask a quick clarifying question, just to be sure, because I will get cut off at 5 minutes. This is more specific. Would these have to be strata in order for them to make sense on this land?
Yes, they would.
Thank you. That's my
That's
question.
the short answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Dominato.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and to staff. A couple of follow-up questions around one of the comments was made yesterday around, it's probably one of our last speakers, around the tree canopy and preserving the trees and whether we could have had a different building form there. And I was wondering if you could comment on that, recognizing we're trying to strike this balance between, retaining trees, adding to them, and if we're taking them out, but also the building form. And was that discussed as part of the application? Any consideration given to that as what that form might look like instead?
I can speak really quickly to that, and then the development planner, Grace, can fill in some more information. The application, as it was submitted, proposed to retain the majority of those trees on the site and also proposed to keep the building footprint quite similar to the existing church. That was per the application. That wasn't sort of a staff direction or anything along those lines. And through our review of the application, we sort of agreed with that approach, seeing that the retaining those trees in the front yards and the side yards really helped to respond to the neighborhood character for the kind of lush front yards and side yards and so on.
Okay, thank you. And then, given that we heard from a number of speakers, and while there was some concerns around height, but also what I heard a lot was around concerns around massing design facade and how it fit. And I'm just wondering, and I don't know if at this stage there would have been any changes to the design in the context of public feedback to date and the urban design panel. I'm just wondering if there have been changes. In some projects we've seen that. There's been some indication of responsiveness, and I'm just curious if you could speak to that.
Yeah, certainly. So in the report in Appendix B, there are a number of rezoning conditions that seek to lower the building height through decreasing the floor-to-floor heights, minimizing the sort of rooftop guardrails and so on. And those conditions were sort of derived partly from what we heard from the public as well as from the urban design panel to lower the building. And those are included in the rezoning conditions along with a number of other conditions to further improve the building and sort of seek further design development.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hardwick.
Good morning. Neighborliness is one of the criteria on which we are basing our judgment. Can one of you please define neighborliness for me in the context of urban planning, together with an explanation of how you think this application meets that definition?
Jason Olnick, Development Planning. Neighborliness is the relationship of a building, however it's constructed, to the surrounding context, and that's how we would define it, and that's how we're reviewing this. This building at the rezoning stage is fundamentally about height, density, and massing. That's what we're looking at the moment. So the step-backs, the setbacks, landscape buffering, how it's sited, where the public come and go, where windows are located, are all part of what we're evaluating right now. As we move forward and we go into the development permit stage, there'll be a much finer level of refinement that can begin to address details and things of that nature that can help with it more.
I'd like more than that. That's not sufficient.
Thanks for the question. It's really a big concern from us too. I want to point out this location is located at the border of the lower density zone and apartment zone. Both areas are part of the Kizinano neighborhood. So both areas compose the character of this surrounding context. The proposal initially addressed this neighborly fit in the following aspects. First of all, it retained the dense maturing trees, which is a distinct attribute of this neighborhood. Second, it is proposed 5-story instead of 6-story to be more compatible with the building heights in this area. Thirdly, it shaped the massing on the rail and the west side to be more compatible to the immediate the contact of the lower buildings. The last, but most important, not most, is also important, is it's recognized the neighborhood feature, which is the garden strip, in which create a continuity of this streetscape by provide landscape the front yard and ground-oriented units facing streets. So also staff evaluate the proposal and take into account of the public feedback and the UDP's comments. We request further improvements to address this neighborhood fit issue. So that's including decreasing the effective building height by 3 feet and decreasing the building height by 3 feet and increasing the rear setback to a minimum 10 feet to allow for substantial landscape buffers in that zone. And also we ask for enhancing the landscapes on site and provide more privacy screen at grade and on the upper level. And also we ask for design development to provide more finer detailing to the facade and also the massing to be more in keeping with the characters in the surrounding area.
Well, I know the area very, very well, and I'm also a student of urban planning, and I'm going to recite back to you what you just said to me. You said trees and landscape.
This is a question, Councillor Hardwick.
Yes, I'm allowed to
You don't need to argue with me, just pushing into a question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll get there. Trees, 6 stories, shape and massing, the garden strip. You referred to the public input, which I have listened to very carefully. You referred to the UDP, which said that they struggled with the design. And again, height and massing, and you've said 3 feet, 1 meter, that's it.
Question,
and again,
please.
landscaping. So given all of that, I mean, I just don't see how this qualifies as being neighborly. And if you can give me something more substantive than that, because there's the height and massing alone is inconsistent with the
Question.
neighborhood.
Thank you.
Okay,
Councillor
well, I don't
Dejanova?
buy
order.
the neighborly.
I understand where it come from.
I have
That's
a point
the
of order,
sentence.
Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, I have a point of order. Thanks.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I do realize that we're in a quasi-judicial body, and I
Yes.
understand that council offers us a little more leniency, Mr. Mayor, but I'm quite concerned when council members are making comments that it could be seen as debate unless they're asking at the end for staff to clarify if that's what they did indeed hear.
Thanks. I have made that point to Councillor Hardwick, and will continue to make it. So we're on with questions. Thanks. We're on to Councillor Carr.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I have a question that's similar to Councillor Hardwick's, so I'll just follow along that line for now. I was reading the moderate income rental housing program information that's on the city's website to try and understand what are the guidelines that are followed by any applicant. And I'm going to quote that on height, it says, over 4 and up to 6 stories on arterials, consider higher forms at arterial intersections. On larger sites off arterials, consider up to 6 stories where appropriate. I have 2 questions that arise out of that. I know one of them you addressed earlier in this public hearing, which is larger site, the definition. I just want to have that repeated. And the second question is, how do you decide the question of where it is appropriate? What is appropriateness?
Sorry. Thank you for the question. I can speak to the large site piece. So the MERP policy did outline for sites under the RS and RT zones off arterials that we could consider larger sites. The term used in that policy was not a defined term. This is different than the large site as it's defined in something like, say, the rezoning policy for sustainable large developments, which looks at sites over 8,000 square meters. This site, around 600 square meters, consisting of 3 lots off an arterial in an RT zone, was determined to meet that sort of eligibility criteria under the policy to allow consideration of the rezoning application that we have.
Okay, and it was determined on what basis? Because, it's 600 versus 8,000 in terms of our large site policy. What made it large? Like, I don't know. Like, if anybody else was to come along, how would they know whether their site was large enough?
In this instance, it was a site with the 3 tied lots with a single building built across them. There wasn't a need to consolidate additional properties into something, and it also allowed us through the pilot program to explore what sites off of arterials and within neighborhoods could be appropriate and could be considered for these types of developments. Okay.
And appropriateness has to do with the largest, so it says where appropriate. I'm trying to dig out what the, in your minds, what questions you would ask yourselves about, is this appropriate or not appropriate?
Yeah, so for example, one of the questions was, is it a mid-block site or is it a corner site? The site being a corner site felt more appropriate for that reason. Is it a site that's in the very center of a low-density area? The site is not in the center of a low-density area. There are other taller forms in the immediate vicinity, while again noting it is within the RT8 zone. So those are a couple of the type of examples that we look at.
Okay, thank you. Those are good specific examples. I appreciate that. My second question has to do with an answer that you provided to the written questions that we sent in. And so I sent in a written question about the units being at ground level or at the lower floors. And your answer at the end was, And I'll quote, however, the applicant has indicated openness to distributing the moderate income units throughout the building, and a condition could be added to the housing agreement rezoning condition to distribute the units throughout the building. Can you tell me what the process would be now if we're in a public hearing? Can draft language so that it is legal be provided to council in order to add that condition of approval?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'll look to my housing and senior colleagues.
Thank you for the question. The housing agreement draft will occur after the public hearing, and it would be at council's discretion to simply move that amendment and have us embellish that condition to include a requirement to distribute the MUR units throughout the building. We do note that the owner's intention, as he explained to us most recently, was in fact to do that anyway, but we're happy to amend the condition to make that clear.
I've got that language. Thank you so much. Those are my questions.
Thank you. On to Councillor Fry.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm really focusing on a lot of the stuff in Appendix B here on the conditions of the approval. First and foremost, as I look at this, and in the absence of any kind of arborist reports, I'm having a hard time understanding the retention of 24 of the 28 trees and the actual viability of that. It seems like an awful lot of tree root mass and to retain those, and obviously it's driving the built form here and the massing. Why haven't we received any kind of arborist reports in this application?
So thank you for the question. We did receive an arborist report with this application that should be available online on the Rezoning Center. We don't normally attach or append arborist reports to the policy reports, but that information is available. Some of the key pieces that assist with the tree retention here are the building. Again, the building footprint following the similar building footprint on site. In addition, in the front yard on 2nd Avenue, there's a retaining wall and so on that are sort of embedded into the site. And that helps with the tree retention, sort of being able to preserve the existing roots and so on. And we've also received sort of further information from the arborist confirming that any pruning to sort of improve the health of the trees and maintain their sort of long-term life will be taken and performed accordingly.
But to be clear, the current building is more or less at grade slab, and we're talking about a 2-story excavation and retaining all those, and the arborist believes that's viable.
Correct.
Okay. So a lot of the concerns we've heard obviously are about built form and design and massing. I note that in the Appendix B it talks about the minimum setback at the rear, and I'm wondering, one of the concerns that we did hear a lot of was about parking and lane access. Does this setback in the urban design 1A language of Appendix B, does that address some of those concerns that we've heard about parking and lane access and safety?
This addresses couple of things. Firstly, it is set back the building massing away, which away from the real property line, which will help to address the overlook and noise issue. Second is allow the space to add landscape buffers, including large trees along in these zones, which also address the impacts to the neighbors. And also it suggests the safety for the access to the parking lots too.
So it will improve access to the underground parking?
Yeah, still the access still there, yeah, but will set back from the lane, has more cleaning space when the access in and out.
Now, I haven't seen anything in Appendix B about cladding and exterior finishing of this building, and I get the feeling, and walking around the area, that that's certainly a sticking point, that it has an incongruous fit with the sort of local vernacular of the Kitsilano craftsman kind of style. Has there been any consideration to that? I don't see anything in Appendix B.
In the condition 5, we do have the condition talk about design development to the architecture form and the character to achieve a better contextual fit with the surrounding area. With the strategies, if you're talking about the materials which is specified in the condition 5B, articulating the building facades to better relate to the scale and the proportion of the surrounding building with the nodes, you will see the is encouraged to a more sensitive design approach, which may be achieved by incorporating various setbacks, color, and material changes, and projections voice to enhance the overall architectural expression. The description here actually reflects the main characters in the areas, the craftsman style. We do think the contemporary building style is compatible in this area, but the building design is further refined to have more detailing to reflect the characters in this area.
But so to be clear then, and forgive me on this process, this won't be coming back to this council for that kind of refinement approval necessarily.
It could be, presented to DP board to approve. Yeah.
Okay, I'm out of time.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bly. Actually, we have Councillor Kirby-Young on the first round of questions, then we can go to the second round, so I'll put you back on the list. Councillor Kirby-Young, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. I just want to follow up on Councillor Fry's on the last question, because we heard on the aesthetics and sort of the visual, more emotive fit of the building, if you will, and specifically on that process then. And I'm looking at Appendix B, just above the conditions, and just want to kind of be very clear for everybody on the process, because it says that prior to council approval of the form of development, the applicant shall obtain approval of a development application by the Director of Planning, who shall have particular regard to the following. So can you just articulate a bit more specifically for us then, that, let's say if theoretically council approves this today, then goes for DP, and the Director of Planning at that point could conceivably decline if he doesn't feel that any changes have been made to material or something that sufficiently addresses those concerns? Is that the case? And how often does that happen? How much change do we normally see in materials? I just want to be really clear about the process for the public.
Great. Thank you for that question. It is normal for the building to go through a much more in-depth design development at the development permit stage, where all of these conditions will be laid out. It will then be taken to the Director of Planning for approval, or the Development Permit Board. They'll determine whether these conditions have been met adequately, or if they want to make further conditions towards that. It would be unusual for the DP board or the Director of Planning to reject the project, because council effectively has approved the height, the density, and the use. So at that point, they're looking for a better articulated form, but they're not effectively addressing height, density, or use.
So if it comes at that stage and it doesn't have a, quote, better articulated form, what happens?
Then they would apply further conditions to make that happen. And there would be what was called prior to conditions to the applicant, which would be required to fulfill those and submit revised drawings for staff review again. It may be asked to go back to the urban design panel for a second look as well. And all of that would culminate in an advice back to the applicant on how they could move forward to a successful permit.
And is that iterative process quite common? Do we see a lot of changes being made?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Okay. And then, so the other question that I had really was also just, and I believe it was asked earlier because I was listening online, was just for clarity on the current zoning. And I know that Councillor Blyde asked a question about the land economics, so it could likely be 4-story strata. But if council does not approve this today, the site owner has the option to do specifically what with it?
Present zoning for the site is RT8, and they could do whatever the RT8 district schedule allows, which I understand is a duplex zone. It would be strata titled or privately owned, and it would have a height maximum, I think, of 35 feet in height, and a density, and just correct me.
0.75.
Thank you, Grace. 0.75 FSR. So you're looking at a duplex form on that property.
I want to add a little bit.
And those would likely be strata, and they would be sold at much higher rates, so it would be a very different type of housing.
You're correct, yes.
Okay. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dejanova.
Thanks so much. I had some more questions. One of them, and these are sparking from other council members' questions. If we were significantly to change or add conditions to the massing or height or building design, could that compromise some of the consultation that's been done? I'm just I've seen that happen before, where in the best of intentions, there's conditions that are made or put on a project, and then the community doesn't have that second opportunity to speak to them. But that being said, the project moves forward, and in fact, this is what the consultation was done on. Is that correct?
That's correct as well. We do have the owner here today, and if council at their discretion decided to reduce the height or the density or impact the viability of the project, I think we would suggest that you hear from them first. We do know from a real estate performer review that this project basically does not create a land lift, that the cost of delivering these MUR units effectively absorbs whatever lift is generated by this increased density. So we're not in a position where we understand there to be much flexibility in making the building smaller and maintaining a viable project.
Okay, thanks. And another question for you, probably Ms. McNeil, I'm not sure, but looking at the pro forma and the public hearing process, there was a question asked if this should, go back to UDP. Are there usually, do you see, or would you expect there would be associated costs in a pro forma if this was to come back to us? Because if that happened, it would have to go through the whole process again, or parts of the process again. It's my understanding if UDP was to take another look at it, as was, I think, an answer to one of the questions, then would it add significant costs that would set it outside of MERP?
No, the standard process for rezonings is that it goes to the panel for one review at the form that is shown in the rezoning, which is not a fully vetted out building design yet. It's essentially form and massing and an approach architecturally. The applicant knows that they are then required to hire their architects to continue on with the development permit stage, which is another set of drawings, much more detailed, and that there is a subsequent urban design panel review as well at that point. That's all embedded within a very understood approach that we've taken for decades in Vancouver.
And thank you. And then there's another set of review or eyes that see this if it does pass rezoning and goes to the development permit stage. Is that correct?
That's correct. And at that point, the neighborhood would have another option of seeing the building at that stage and commenting on it before the board made their decision.
That was my. I just wanted to make sure the process hadn't changed with the DP. Also, and I'm not sure who might want to answer this question. Just could you remind me, the other two MERP projects that we passed on this agenda, did they suggest that the units would be throughout the building, the MERP units?
Yes, they would. And generally that's a natural outcome of having a variety of different unit types. There needs to be family units in addition to studios and one bedrooms, and locating them all on one floor generally doesn't work with a floor plan. So we would anticipate those to be spread without generally all of the MERP projects that you're going to be seeing over the next several months.
Usually it's a floor plate issue because if there's no inboard or borrowed light bedrooms, is that correct? Then
That's
you
correct,
have to have a window for each bedroom on the outside of I mean, as Mr. Garrison explained, better than I could. I'm asking if that's correct.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so that could be the reason for it. And also, would it be suggested, or was it suggested, that the reason that it wasn't something that the applicant said they for sure would do is because the pro forma, they're not sure where the costs will turn out, and they are concerned that they may have to subsidize some of the MERP units with higher rents from other units in the market?
Sorry, could you?
So if you have units on higher floors, sometimes you can get higher rents for those units. And I'm just wondering if there was any thought to whether or not they would have to subsidize some of the more affordable units with some of the rents from those units. I just wondered if that was a reason it wasn't committed to.
Well, it is certainly a concern. I mean, really, the structure of the MERP program is that the 80% of the building that is market rent is what offsets the sort of cost, if you will, of delivering the more affordable units. So that is a concern, and it's one of the things that we have to balance out.
Thanks. That's my time.
Thanks very much, Councillor Weep.
Yeah. First, I want to follow up on Councillor Carr's comment of distributing the moderate income units. Who could help with that language? And on on how that would be delivered? And how does that look in actuation where it would be reviewed 5 years from now to ensure that that's continuing to happen by the proponent?
Yes, so certainly if it's the interest of council, staff could work to prepare a proposed amendment language that you could consider. So that's something that we could do through the clerk for you. In terms of how it would work, I mean, I think we would have to look at going into the next phase of the process. All of the conditions around the delivery and management, monitoring, enforcement going forward of the MERP program will be held in the housing agreement in Section 219 covenant that will be registered on title. And so it would likely be an amendment to those, the conditions that will be put into those agreements. Those would normally be done to and then negotiated through the enactment phase to the satisfaction of the general manager of planning and the director of legal services. And then going forward, it would be part of our management and monitoring process that we'll be checking in with on these buildings going forward. So what we would be monitoring is compliance with the housing agreement. So to the extent that a mix of units is a housing agreement condition, that would be part of the monitoring and enforcement over time.
Okay. Second is on the inboard unit and some of the livability in some of the units. So it's been brought forward a few times through the project. The inboard unit, the glass door isn't facing any of the windows, and some of the other ones have really low kind of light wells. And so I'm just wondering if we could talk about the livability of some of the units that seem to be kind of pushing our limits.
Yeah, and the proposal includes one inboard bedroom in 3-bedroom units, and this one bedroom we still seeking further improvements for this livability of this space. For example, to maximizing the borrowing nights and the internal ventilation, and also make it more flexible use to meet the different needs for the different families. And in terms of the light well, that unit is located at the southeast corner, which is the condition we ask this to eliminate the light well and oriented the unit's door and windows facing the lane, which is the lower level, to ensure all the windows above grades. Actually, this unit is the only unit has 1 foot below grades. All other units above grades.
Okay, that's good to hear. Third one, the amenity room, and maybe it's looking different. It shows in this that it's 307 square feet, yet in the proposal here it talks about that the amenity space should be 600 square feet with an accessible washroom, kitchenette, and storage room. Can you explain a little bit about the amenity space?
Yeah, so I can touch briefly on that. So with one of the recommendations in Appendix B, the application proposed the indoor amenity room on the 5th floor, fronting Larch Street. Through what we heard throughout the process and our review, the report recommends relocating the amenity room to the rooftop. And so that condition to expand the amenity room and ensure an accessible washroom and kitchenette and so on would be included in that further design development.
So do we have an understanding of what that massing would look like on that story?
Yeah, this 600 square feet actually is 10% of the roof area, which is we required to locate it centrally and set back from all edges of the roof at least 15 feet, which will be invisible from the streets.
Okay, final ones on the integrated water management, and kind of follow up on Fry's comment with the tree retention. One of the pictures behind me states a 70-meter bioswale, and it also showcases that the parking looks like it's going under some of the trees. And so I'm just wondering, one on the tree retention, one on the integrated water management, and is there a 70-meter bioswale, and where is it located? Because it's not seen in some of the diagrams.
So correct. Some of the plan documents reference a bioswale primarily located on the west side of the property. Through our review, obviously we want to ensure the health and safety of those trees on that portion of the property. In the rezoning conditions with some of the landscape conditions, some of the items that the applicant would need to submit should this proceed further would be a full tree management plan to ensure that those trees would be safe and healthy, as well as a good amount of additional detail on the water management proposed for the site generally.
Thanks very much.
Is there a 70-meter
Sorry.
house wall?
Councillor Weeping, put yourself back on the list. We're on to Councillor Fry for a second round.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Looking at Appendix B, the urban design item 2, where they describe design development to significantly reduce the actual and perceived height of the building, and then goes on to reference the appurtenance on the roof, which I'm assuming is the amenity space, yes?
Yes.
Appurtenance is a new term for me. So.
Yeah, and appurtenance. Yeah, it's including amenity space and stair and the elevator.
Right. Oh, okay. So it's the elevator as well. Yeah. So now, as I look at the parking requirements, which it's illustrated, the parking requirements are 37 spaces, yet the applicant's suggesting 56 spaces of parking. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
So given the concerns expressed around perceived height and actual height, would it be possible to reconfigure? Do we need all those parking spaces? Can the amenity space be in the basement like many amenity spaces are found?
Good question. Certainly at a sort of with any further design development, if the applicant wished to reduce the proposed parking, staff would be open to that, knowing that they're over providing the parking per the parking bylaw. Exploring locating an indoor amenity room on a lower level, we found from some of our previous work, having an indoor amenity space kind of bright and open and accessible to everyone in the building and an exciting place to be in, such as a rooftop location, as well as being immediately adjacent to outdoor space for the residents on the rooftop in this situation, can result in a great sort of community building sort of space, as opposed to locating on a lower level that's not directly adjacent to large outdoor space.
Which, ironically, we've heard from the community, the loss of the amenity that is in the current church at grade is a big part of the concern around this building. So it leaves me thinking maybe the amenity on the roof is not as, it may be community building for the residents within the building, but maybe not for the larger community, and there may be a missed opportunity there. Certainly not suggesting that should be the outcome of this building, but it's okay. So the MERP, is that the conditions of MERP are only applicable to a CD1, or could we theoretically have a MERP operating with some kind of allowance under an RT8? Assuming we could add a little bit of density to the outright RT8 vernacular.
Yeah, so the moderate income rental program is a rental incentive-based program where a range of incentives are offered, including additional height and density, development cost levies, waivers, and other things. So theoretically, and we have had some Rental 100 projects go ahead under the existing zoning rather than seeking rezoning. I think the challenge in this case would be that RT8 zoning is a relatively low-density zone where all of the density is available to duplex or townhouse form at ownership costs. So it would be, I think, challenging.
Does RT8 allow for some discretion there, some discretionary height and density increases?
I don't believe, looking at our designers, any discretion over the 0.75 FSR. There's no density bonus in that zone for rental or affordable housing.
Okay, and so lastly, we heard from the previous MERP applicant, the Molnar family, their frustration around rezoning and DPs being two separate processes, and how, as a time consideration, it might be better to fuse the two. So I'm wondering, and I hate to ask, but is it possible to bring we can't change that for this process, but is it possible to bring back the DP at council's request?
Council could, at your discretion, decide to do that, although you have delegated those authority to the Director of Planning.
Yeah.
And that is embedded within the charter as well. So
sure.
I think we'd have to seek, advice from our legal counsel as well as to that point. So I just want to point out your question around concurrent processing. And we have, in an effort to deliver more rental housing, we embedded a system that was like that about 4 years ago. We realized that it failed, and it failed because the applicants weren't in a position to design it to a DP level drawing package at the rezoning stage. So they ended up having to submit multiple drawing sets. It has expanded the program, essentially, and the whole goal of doing this concurrently failed. So we've now backed into prioritizing social housing. We have an expedited process for that. And for the regular market rental goes through a standard rezoning process and a DP process because that works with the industry.
Thanks very much. That's the 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Hardwick, on to questions, please.
I'd like to talk about the inboard bedrooms, whoever's the best person to talk about that. What is the precedent for these inboard bedrooms, and what is the thought around fire safety?
Do you want to take it, Chris?
The building code.
Just to clarify, are you asking if it's specifically a fire life safety concern?
Well, I think inboard bedrooms, that being bedrooms without windows, are a concern, period,
Right.
From a livability perspective. But the question that I'm asking are, what are the implications, or have the implications been considered through the lens of fire safety?
They're not considered a risk to fire safety in the building bylaw. Mechanical ventilation is required, but it'll be sprinklered either way.
Are there other examples of these throughout the city, and how many are there?
I can't tell you how many. There are some examples. As part of this pilot program, we're exploring how inboard bedrooms will land, how they're used, how they can be utilized, if there can be borrowed light. There are examples of inboard bedrooms historically that go back in different configurations. The worst of those being where we put in a large closet or a large den, and that's become a de facto bedroom. And so we're trying to get away from that.
So do we, or have we approved, other than what we've just done last week with the first two MERP programs, or projects, have we seen these inboard bedrooms before, recently, not converted from some other form of a closet?
In very limited circumstances.
So it's been very limited, and we have limited experience. Are we now promoting this as a new form in our configuration of suites?
I cannot say that we're promoting it. But we are looking at it. We're exploring it as a way to make more affordable units for families.
Thanks very much. Councillor DeGenova.
Thanks so much. I did want to ask a follow-up question on that. It's my understanding, just looking at the policy that has brought us here to allow for this, I myself moved a motion, several motions on inboard and borrowed light bedrooms. I know that we had several people come and speak to us wanting those, talking about children living in closets instead, or dens. Dens are rooms without, I suppose, windows.
That's the question.
So my question is did staff not start working? I just heard a question about policy. Are we just doing this now? I understand this has been in the works for quite some time, that staff have been looking through the making room policy for families. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. This has been an issue that was raised throughout the Housing Vancouver process. It's been raised through our looks and consultation around our family housing guidelines, the housing, I always get this wrong, for families in high density guidelines. And so we understand, I think staff understand that it's an issue where there are certainly sides to the debate, and it has been a debate around whether we should allow these types of bedrooms. They are allowed in other municipalities, so you hear it from the development industry quite a bit, who do work across the municipal borders. But we understand that it's a concern, and that's why, as part of one of the ways coming out of Housing Vancouver, we tried to look at a managed way to address some of the concerns, both the interest in allowing these types of bedroom configuration and the concerns about them, was to allow it in a very limited way through the moderate income rental housing pilot program as a way to test how it could land in practice to help us continue the public discussion and the discussion around policy around the design of these kinds of units. So from our perspective, allowing them in the moderate income rental pilot only to secure third bedrooms, only when it seems challenging to deliver it in the normal ways. And in this case, you can see it's one unit in a 63-unit building where they're seeking to do this, is a way for us to test out how this works in practice so that we can inform the policy discussion going forward.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Garrison, I think this question will be for you. So just letting you know before you sit down again. In looking at our at council's goals, and we spent a lot of time talking about affordable housing and trying to make housing affordable. Is this is the model that sort of is suggested for MERP to work? It's my understanding. Is that correct? Just further to the question about in RT8 zoning, could you add a little bit of density? I guess if you had 3 units, you could use a little bit of that rent to offset one, but it wouldn't be significant. Is that the idea that the 20% gets significant discount because of the 80% that otherwise would be built as market anyways?
Yeah, that's the general structure, and we have done both looking at developing the MERP pilot program, but also in the rental incentive review, we've done pretty substantial financial testing, built form testing on what's needed to make first market rental work, and then to try and embed affordability in that rental housing like we are through these moderate income rental programs. We have seen in zoning districts where it's zoned RS or RT, you're typically needing to get up into the 2 FSR range before you even have a market rental project that can work. Certainly RT8 zoning would be a significant challenge to make rental housing viable.
Okay, thanks. One more question. What's currently allowed on the site is RT8. What's it zoned for, correct?
Correct, yes.
So what would we see rents in a new RT8 build to be? And how many families could live there in, considering bylaw 3575?
Yeah, it's likely to build 10 strata units in a townhouse form.
Okay, so the rents would be significantly higher than what's proposed here for the same bedroom?
Yes, I mean, it's a difficult question because there is so little comparable rental that would be in that type of a form. But certainly we would expect the rents to be very high in an RT8 form.
My apologies for the difficult questions.
There we go.
And Mr. Mayor, I see others on the queue. I'm happy to move the motion.
Okay, we do Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, just sort of a final question, and two actually, and just quick clarification following up on Councillor DeGenova, and I'd also asked her what could be built there, but they wouldn't necessarily be rental. They could be strata. They could be sold. So we may not have rental units at all.
Correct.
So they could be sold, or if they were rental, they would have to be fairly high with the economics on that land. A logical assumption, right?
Likely, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify, we're not swapping potentially a different type of rental for another type of rental, we're actually swapping housing type to ownership, possibly.
Correct, and this proposal, it would provide secured rental housing as well.
Okay, my question really relates to, my main question was around community amenity, and I was really struck by a lot of the speakers that we had on, that are sort of really, for lack of a better word, grieving the loss of the church and just sort of the auxiliary services and the daycare and the other space. And I know this project comes in under the MERP program, so it is subject to this citywide and the utilities DCL, but the floor area is waived because it's considered amenity. So on page 15 of the report, and I'm wondering if you can comment if, because people think of amenities, what is it? But we're now seeing rental housing as an amenity itself, is that right? And that's the reason for waiving the DCL? Okay, and then also, it's also unique that the annual rent increases apply for moderate income units, even on a change in tenant, which is something that we haven't seen. So that's sort of a long-standing amenity. Given that there's a 1.2 million DCL waiver on the project, was there any opportunity, or is there anything that can be done outside the box to provide any kind of externally facing community amenity other than for the amenity space, whether it's on the top or the bottom for the units of the building? Have we had any out-of-the-box conversations around what that could look like? And is there space on the site to do anything, given the massing of the building, if it was an external play area, or if it was a space that was made available and rented to a community group that could be used for daycare? If there's been any type of dialogue or possibility to do something like that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it came up from some of the speakers and elsewhere throughout the consultation process around the value that some people saw with the play space currently located on the site. And I'm sure if council is interested, there could be a possibility to see if a similar sort of play area for the neighborhood could be followed through with the development if it proceeds.
Okay, but with the tree retention, the massing, the size of it, I mean, is it feasible to have any type of amenity, even if sort of conversations with the applicant indicated a willingness to do that, but just practically and physically with the site configuration?
Thank you for the question. We have looked at that as well. There is an existing play space that's along Larch Street, and it is forward of the trees in between the boulevard and the curb. And we think there's an opportunity to keep that. And so we'd like to explore that with the applicant through the DP stage.
Okay.
And see if we could preserve it for play space for public use.
Okay, and why does that happen with the applicant, the DP stage, versus coming forward and embedded as part of this
It could
process?
occur at either. It's just that it's not been discussed at this stage. If council, at their discretion, would like to, then we could craft wording through the clerk for having you to amend our conditions in Appendix B to include that. We are prepared to do this anyway through the DP stage, but we're happy to do it as a condition of rezoning.
Okay. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Bly.
Thank you very much. Maybe this is for Mr. Garrison, just to follow up on the inboard bedroom conversation. I seem to recall that, and this is coming from somebody who was given the inboard bedroom in Kitsilano in a rental 20 years ago, so I've actually lived in one of those bedrooms. And there's certainly not a bedroom with a view of the water, but it was a bedroom at the time of being 20. My question around it is, in strata condos, we see these rooms, they're called dens.
Yes.
Is it the same, like in terms of, in principle of planning, is it the same thing with a new name? I've seen a lot of them, so I'm not really sure why it doesn't seem new to me, but it seems new to this conversation.
Yeah, that's right. And I think one of the reasons why we're interested in exploring it, and one of the sides of the arguments on this, is that you are actually seeing these things proliferate in a number of buildings throughout the city, strata and rental. The challenge is they aren't actually bedrooms because they aren't permitted to be bedrooms. And so they are dens that are being used as bedrooms. I think the concerns that are raised about that, and I think we share it potentially, is that they aren't designed to be bedrooms. So there isn't the proper light and ventilation. They're designed to be dens, or in some cases storage rooms that are being used as bedrooms. And so if that's the argument goes that if that's the situation we're in and that's how people are currently using those spaces, we should maybe look at whether we should ensure that these are designed well for everything from ventilation and light to life safety. So that's the argument we're following, and that's what we're trying to test out here to see if we can accommodate an inboard bedroom in a way that addresses those issues.
Thank you very much. That's my only question.
Thank you. Councillor Dececember.
I was prepared to move the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, but before we make the decision, after I don't see any more questions, then we had a few council members who were absent for portions of the public hearing of this application. So if they wish to vote, they must confirm that they have reviewed the proceedings in the meeting. When I call your name, can you please indicate if you've reviewed the proceedings from December 12th and or 17, and if you will be voting? Councillor Dececember.
Yes, from December 12th. I was here for the whole meeting last night. I have reviewed them, and I will be voting.
Thank you, Councillor Dominato. I'll check when she gets back. Councillor Hardwick. Thank you, Councillor Kirby. Thank you, Councillor Swanson. Okay, I'll have to check with Councillor Dominato. Councillor Dominato, did you have a chance to review the proceedings from December 12th and or 17th? Okay, great. Thanks very much, and I have as well. So council will now make its decision on the application. We have a mover for recommendation, seconder. Seconder, heard Councillor Dominato. Great, so we'll move to debate. People want to put the, people want to debate. Please go ahead, you have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'd like to thank staff for the thorough answers to the many rounds of questions. I'm sorry I didn't get written questions in. It was a long day yesterday and evening, but certainly in thinking about this and thinking about some of the thoughtful comments of the the speakers that have come to share either their enthusiastic support or their concern with us. I certainly understand that this is new. What we're looking at, although this isn't the first MERP application now, and I think as another council member said, we saw the last applications move forward without such an issue, and I'm not sure why that is. I think sometimes, in my experience, I've seen that happen, and it's those that you least expect, and with others, there doesn't seem to be very much. But I think that that's what's important and integral to the public hearing process and sitting here in the quasi-judicial way that we do, and that we take input through correspondence, through people who are coming to speak to us. And I think it's important to note that this is creating affordability for people who I hear are having to leave the city of Vancouver. And I'd really like to thank our staff and also thank the applicant for working together. I'm sure it was exhaustive as you came together, because technically the MERP program is a pilot program. And in moving forward to create that pilot, it's not easy in the very beginning stages. I understand that. I do hope that this project or projects like this might have potentially, if this moves forward, be available for the short program, the social housing or rental tenure, which, to I think Councillor Fry's point, would allow for an expedited rezoning and development permit process. I was very happy to bring forward motions that help to create that along with council here. And I think that it's important to realize that, you know, when we look at ourselves on the scale in Metro Vancouver of delivering affordable housing, how fast are we able to deliver it? I know our staff do the best they can, but we have a lot of applications coming forward. There needs to be the due diligence done, and I'm very happy to see inboard bedrooms here also. It's something that I have been asking for, and I think to some of the other comments and what I heard from Councillor Bly, I too was concerned about this. I think we first heard from Mr. Stivell when he was president of before he was president of UDI. He wanted to do this through his own work, and in learning a little bit more about them and finding out that some kids were living in bedrooms that were pantries or dens, and I know we don't even allow dens to be built now because of that reason. I think that it's important that we do have those checks and balances for ventilation, for proper lighting, and at the same time, without having the constraints of the floor plate, to make sure that we have family-sized housing that works for families and works for everyone here in our city. I do understand that there's concern from residents in the community. I'm also concerned about the people who said they live in the community now, but it's because they live either with their parents, it's because they live in conditions that if they were to expand their families, they wouldn't be able to afford a single family home, or a basement suite wouldn't be appropriate for them. So for those reasons, I will be supporting this project. I have wholeheartedly shown my support for more affordable housing in the city over 2 terms, and that definitely comes from my experience working in non-market housing and with some of our most vulnerable and marginalized people, understanding how affordability really makes or breaks a person's ability to live in the city of Vancouver. And I don't think that that should just be on the east side, as we've discussed here at council. I think that that should be across our city. So I think that it's really important that we look at this model. Right now, it's 80% of units are subsidizing 20% of units that are more affordable. Hopefully one day, maybe we'll get to different numbers and mixes on that. But in the pilot, I think that our staff have done an excellent job of bringing this forward, again, with the applicant. And I think amenity space is important. Amenity space on the roof is important. Our parks and amenity space are important. As families live differently, that's what we see. People don't have backyards necessarily, and I think that the due diligence
very much.
the staff was done. So thank you. I will be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Carr.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. First of all, if I can just thank all the speakers who came and all those people who signed petitions. Actually, we read petitions too. So if you've signed your name, it's valued and counted in our minds. And to thank staff and the applicant for really working collaboratively to try and meet some of the issues raised by the public in meetings you've had with public members and with the UD, the Urban Design Panel as well. So how I make my decisions, I sort of weigh a number of criteria or issues as I move forward the process of decision making. First, it's whether or not it adheres to policy. So I've read the MERP guidelines and questioned staff on this, and my big concern around that was where is appropriate. And so staff did explain, thank you, you're very clear about where something is appropriate or not in this particular case. I do, however, think that there was a difference of opinion in terms of where staff have landed on what is where is the appropriate location, and what the public has come forward to us on where something is appropriate. And that issue has to do with the second condition of the MERP program, which is neighborhood fit. And so in terms of neighborhood fit, I think that there's a number of measures that have been taken by the applicant and in working with staff. I actually happen to really like the idea of the retention of the trees. I'm a big one on urban forest canopy. I know there's been some people arguing about that, but I think it does help to mitigate a lot of issues, certainly in screening and those kinds of things. But it appears to me that there's been a real struggle to try and deal with the size, the height, the massing, the proximity to neighbors, and it's a struggle, and I think it's a struggle because the project and the guidelines of MERP allow for a 6-story, so it's been bringing it down from that 6-story, and that in the context of a neighborhood which is, by everyone's account, a low-density neighborhood, has been really problematic. In terms of affordability, I really like the MERP program because of the fact that this is the first program that really specifies affordability over the life of the building in terms of vacancy control and in terms of actual at 30% of the local median income of households. I think that is exactly where we need to head as a city. So that's on the programmatic side. On the public input and concerns, many people express concern about the loss of the church and its amenities. Those are beyond the control or decision-making power of council to deal with. This is a private landowner that sold it to another private landowner. We cannot get more of those amenities back in place. It's just not possible. In terms of the input, it's clear that the overwhelming amount of information we have received from the public is a no. And some people say, well, why can't we do a smaller development with more affordable units? Clearly, staff said in a private development, it's at its max. That's not possible to get more affordability, to get a smaller size and make it affordable or possible, feasible through the delivery through the market, the private market. So in terms of overall pros and cons, the issue I weigh in my decision, how do we balance policy versus public input? So I believe that even if a project meets all of the policy guidelines as interpreted by staff and worked through, I still believe that council has to do due diligence in weighing public input. Otherwise, what's the point of a public hearing? So you have to weigh both of those ends. In terms of the value of 63 rental units, more particularly 13 affordable secured units at really affordable levels, versus the value of the RT7, RT8 zoning, which many people have outlined actually also produces affordability. And it doesn't come through as clearly in the defined RT7, RT8, but it does in terms of the basement suites that in many, many, if not the majority of homes.
Just 20 seconds.
Mm-hmm. So I'm very worried about this project undermining RT7, RT8 zoning, the thin edge of the wedge that it could at the edge of this zoning. And so because of my concern around RT7 and RT8, I think this is an issue that should be decided in the citywide plan, not in a rezoning application. Therefore, I will be voting no.
Thank you, Councillor Weeb.
Yes, this has been a interesting process, and I really appreciate all the speakers and all the messages and all the letters we have gotten. I've got one letter in front of me from an old friend that really breaks down 4 points, and the first one talks about the 6 stories instead of a 4-story, and I think that that's something we're wrestling with here is, do we have a 4-story building?
Councillor Weeb, just to let you know, we can't introduce any new evidence at this point. It has been sent in.
Yeah. This is the one that everyone has.
So it's been distributed to...
Yeah, this is a letter that was sent to everyone prior. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much.
No, this was sent on the 16th, and it has everyone's name at the top.
Sorry, just being through.
Okay. And so I think we're wrestling with affordability. For me, I lived at 10th and Trafalgar when we had an affordable housing project come in that blocked our view. And it was one that we wrestled with because there we were in Kitsilano and had to wrestle with the loss of a view and the gaining of what ended up being one of my good friends. And so it is a battle you had to wrestle when I did lose a view at 10th and Trafalgar when the building did come in on Broadway, which ended up having Nat's Pizzeria, which is where I worked later on. So things do change in the neighborhood, and this is something I'm wrestling with this project. The second one, the point that he brought up was that the units of affordable housing should be distributed through the building. And so I put an amendment forward. If we could put the amendment up on. So if we can go to amendment queue. And so my amendment talks about what the proponent had responded, stating that we would include a condition in the housing agreement that requires the moderate income rental units to be distributed throughout the building to the greatest extent possible, while taking into consideration the required family unit mix and financial constraints of the project to the satisfaction of the General Manager of Planning, Urban Design, Sustainability, and the Director of Legal Services. This has been worked with staff, and I think it's appropriate that we don't have all the units on the bottom floor with a little bit on the second floor. I think it's respectful that we have them mixed throughout the building, and that's why I brought this forward.
Thanks very much. We need a seconder. Thank you. Councillor Dejanova, I have you on the queue to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I have a point of information for the staff, if possible. Sure. I would like to support this. I'm just also concerned that for some of the questions that I asked about this before, that could this ultimately hurt the affordability of being able to subsidize that 20% of units? Or would it be, I mean, we're not allowed to have friendly amendments, so I could possibly draft an amendment if it was something that staff could explore and that would be considered at the time of the development permit board. I'm not sure if that's appropriate, but just looking to make sure that we don't have an unintended consequence here. Thank you. Oh, Mr. Garrison's, it's a little bit low for perhaps, yeah. For him. Hard to see over maybe Councillor Kirby-Young for the clerk.
Yeah, thank you. Staff have looked at the wording, and I think that the phrase around while taking into consideration both the required mix of family units, which will set some of the way that things are distributed throughout the building, and the financial constraints, and have that be weighed by the General Manager of Planning and in consultation with the Director of Legal Services, would give us comfort that we could move forward with the direction, understanding what it is that Council is seeking out of this, while being able to balance that with still having a viable project. So I think this, we would be comfortable moving forward with that.
Thanks very much.
Thanks so much. So I'd like to, the amendment?
Sure.
Thanks. I'll wait till my timer starts. There we go. Then I'm happy with that information to support the amendment, and knowing also that the other two, I think that this should be held to the same standard as the others, as long as the financial model for MERP and our policy still works. So happy to support the amendment moved forward by Councillor Weeb. I think that it is about not just that every door looks the same, but that there's dignity in being able to live in integrated housing, and for no family to know which of those families necessarily is paying below market rent. So I appreciate this, and we'll be supporting it.
Thank you. On the amendment, Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. I just wanted to say I appreciate the idea of it. I particularly appreciate hearing from staff that it won't slow down or impact affordability. And I just have to say it's just not a concern I have in this building. I've lived, if they were basements, maybe, though I recognize basement suites have been the alternative or the only option for a lot of people. They're not in the basement, they're on the ground floor. I live on a ground floor. I like living on a ground floor. I just don't think this is necessary, but glad to hear it won't impact the project anyway. So I won't support it, but whatever.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bly.
I am, excuse me, I am going to support this amendment. I think that we actually could change the way that we consider mixed rental buildings. And if we're going to continue down this path of below market in one building, then let's mix it all up. I mean, I hear that from people all of the time that live in single family. We don't want to build a society where people are segregated and separated. And so I think this is great. And will it be a huge impact to this property? Maybe not. Does it send the right message to the building community and to staff that this council wants to see everyone walk in and out of the same door and be treated the same? Yes, we know that socially people are rising to the occasion of their life if they are living with people that they sort of see as aspirational as well as challenging in the same, like people have to feel like they're striving for something in order for them to really take charge of their life and however they want to be able to one day be in a market rent. It's not to segregate them, it's to just create opportunity where everybody can be treated as equal and therefore they can take back their own independence to do what they want with their life. So I think it's great. I don't think it's taking anything away from this project, as we've heard from staff. So, and I would hope that we just do this as a practice, a normal practice now on projects in the future. Thank you to Council Weed for bringing it forward.
Thank you. Councillor Dominato.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Weed for bringing forward this amendment. I'm fully supportive of it. I mean, we know that mixed units work, integrated units. And I think at the end of the day, we have to remember that we're talking from a policy standpoint. We're using a policy framework that is looking at income and income ranges in order to provide a range of housing, and I'm fully supportive of having a diversity of housing in the city. But at the end of the day, we're also just talking about people. We all live together. That's what we do right now. And so totally support where we're going with this and where Councillor Weed's trying to take this. And so because we're using income as one way to sort of get at those gaps in terms of not having adequate housing for those income ranges. But again, we're just talking about people living together. And so I think I'm very supportive of the amendment. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Hi, maybe redundant, but yes, I will also support the amendment. I think that it's dangerous when it's divisive and we separate and distinguish people. I remember when I lived in Kitson, I lived in a condo. It was actually a purchased condo, but there were people, and it was sort of right on the dividing line between where single-family homes started, and someone said, "Oh, you're in the apartment." And it was a very different perspective, and I felt it at the time as a condo dweller relative to some of the single-family homes. And, so I share that as a personal experience because I think it's dangerous if we don't create those sort of inclusive and welcoming communities. I also think that when council does consider amendments like this, we need to do it thoughtfully with the recognition that we're actually sending a signal, I think, to industry around values. And it's also an opportunity to look at something and see if it works. And I do appreciate the fact that there is respect for ensuring that we achieve the goal of maintaining the 13 affordable units, which are there in perpetuity, which I think is what's exciting about this MERT policy. But if it's achievable, I think it does set an example and potentially a case study or a precedent, if you will, to look at having more of these things come forward from the industry side as opposed to council initiating it. So I think when we consider these amendments, I look at them in that context and I think, okay, is this a direction that we'd like to go and see more of? And I think the answer to that is yes. So I will support the amendment. And thank you, Councillor Weed, for bringing it forward.
Thank you. That's it on the queue, so we can vote on this amendment. Councillor Bly. Great, that's passed with Councillor Boyle in opposition. Back to the main queue. Councillor Weeb, do you have anything else?
Yeah, and then further on, the design of the fit for the neighborhood. And I think that's something that can be worked on. I think that there's a lot of work to do to really make it fit, right? The rain chains, the door. I mean, there's so much, the little park bench, the playground. There's so many components to this building that really kind of make it fit. And I think there's real opportunity moving forward to add those elements to the building. And the last one is just the green aspect. That's going to be a green building, the bioswales, the green roof, the meeting our green standards, I think, is really kind of moving this project in one that can be a sustainable project for generations in the future. So I will be supportive of the project.
Thank you. Councillor Dominato.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I have a proposed amendment I've circulated to council, and
thank you.
And so I'll speak to that really briefly. So it's proposing that with respect to alterations around the development, that staff work closely with the applicant to further refine the building massing, height, setbacks, and detailing to be more compatible with the existing neighborhood character. And also to explore the opportunity to provide public amenity space on site for children's play and community socialization. I bring these forward, and I also, like Councillor Weeb, I consulted staff around this because I heard very loud and clear from, and I know some residents are here today, many can't be here again today, but were here yesterday and last week, concerns around the massing and the setbacks and the fit and even facades are in terms of the neighborhood. And I realize it's early days. Councillor DeGenova did point out in her questioning around the fact that through the development permit process, there are further stages in terms of the refinement, working with architects. But I do think we're having a public hearing. We need to be responsive to the feedback that we've heard, and there seem to be concerns around that. So I think we need to be explicit in asking our staff to work with the applicant to explore that. And I think it's reasonable. Obviously, we won't be part of that. That's the operations side. But I think just to give that strategic direction to, and then also just I think Councillor Kirby-Young spoke to this, the concerns around, and we heard very clearly the loss of the church and the space and socialization. So if there's an opportunity to look at something, whether it's on-site or nearby, as I think staff indicated on Larch Street, for more public socialization and space. So that's what I'm moving, and looking for council support.
Okay, thanks very much. I just have a point of information. Councillor DeGenova.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Again, just wanted to ask staff, because of some of the unintended consequences I've seen in the past, this doesn't say explore, it says to further refine. So the way I'm reading this is that it would further refine building massing, height, parking, setbacks. So I'm not sure if it refines one of those, all of those, but I would like to ask you through to staff if this would trigger another public hearing, and at that point, if this is essentially ending the application here, if that's not possible, considering the MERP policy.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I know that's a lot in one
Can
question.
staff answer that now, or we need a recess, or?
No, I think the recommendation is for the Director of Planning to pursue this. That will happen through the DP stage. There's already conditions in Appendix A that talk about reducing the height and the setbacks, and we've done a test case and shown council what that looks like. So I read this as being in line with the intent and concept of Appendix B conditions anyway, and that providing that you've got the Director of Planning being the deciding factor in this, then this will naturally unfold through the development permit process.
I have another point of information, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Thanks. The point of information to you, Ms. McNeil, because I can't ask the applicant's questions at this point. However, you've had the chance to speak with the applicant, is would this in any way make it difficult to achieve the MERP affordability? Because, I mean, we can ask you to work with them, but it actually doesn't just say explore, it says refine. So then they would have to refine the building massing, they would have to refine the height, they would have to refine excess parking. Maybe we do need a legal recess, because I'm just wondering if is it refine one of these or all of these? How would legal interpret this? Mr. Mayor, I'm just concerned. I mean, if the word refine instead said explore, and I'd be happy to send in that amendment.
Sure, maybe we can get an answer
Yes.
from staff here.
Yeah, thank you for that. I see this drafting in the spirit of what Condition 1 out of Appendix B does, which asks for the building to be set back further from the rear property line. And then as you move through that, Condition 2, it asks for the building to be dropped in height as well. We have vetted out those conditions with the architect and the owner, and they have done a series of sketches to illustrate what that might look like, and we're prepared to accept the intent of that moving forward. So provided that we're in the spirit of the recommendations in Appendix B, we feel that we're comfortable moving forward with it. If the intent, however, is to go beyond these conditions that are in Appendix B, then it would, to stop us from coming back to another public hearing, it would be safer to use the word explore.
Okay.
Because at that point, then we could vet out any performer review that would go further what the intent of Appendix B is showing today.
Okay, so I'm sending that in right now, but I have one last question, and I'm sorry, I have to ask this as a point of information as well, is when we look at affordable housing and the delivery and time on that, because I understand right now the short program doesn't have the capacity to take in rental tenure, it's only the social housing. So this right now is not going through the short program. Would this add any extra time to the timeline for this?
Well, as I said, we've already vetted out the conditions in Appendix B with the owner and their architect, and they understand them. They are drafting, if you approve today, their DP drawings based on that. So we don't see any kind of delay in proceeding on with the development permit process.
Then one last follow-up. Is this already included in Appendix B?
It is in more prescribed language around specifically what to do with the setbacks and the height.
Okay.
But the thing that we don't have is the public amenity space at grade for children's play.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay, so we need a seconder for this. Councillor Blythe, thank you. We'll go on to the amendment queue. Councillor Fry.
Yeah, I'm happy to support this and submitted an amendment to this amendment, which I've sort of set up so that it could be severable, understanding that might be the will of council. And actually, apropos of recent comments to the effect that perhaps refine might be replaced with explore, I'm not sure if that's appropriate to do this now in this amendment to the amendment. Would that be okay without actually?
Well, I already just sent it in, but
So it hasn't, so
Sorry,
is this a text that you're submitting as a proposed amendment to the amendment?
This is a proposed amendment to the amendment, but in light of just the conversation and the recommendation from staff to change refine to explore.
Just 1 second, please. So what, in addition, are you proposing?
Well, I guess, I could just like quickly cut and paste it and send it as well as an additional, but I'm wondering if...
You're just changing the word refine to explore, and where...
Well, also, no, striking minor alterations.
No, I understand that, but you have this proposed language here, but there's one other word that you're...
Yeah, I was just to cut through the
So, the second paragraph...
Where it says refine.
End, it would be explore.
Yeah, apropos of just the comments that staff just...
Yep, 1 second on the point of order. I just want to get this clear. So that's the text
exactly.
you're proposing? Okay, can we, clerks, can you change refine to explore? There. Okay, and, okay, point of order. I'll freeze your timer here, Councillor Fry. Councillor DeGenova?
Mr. Mayor, before you did that, and I had signaled in asking my questions for the point of information that I would do that through an amendment. So I don't see that as a part of the amendment that Councillor Fry sent in.
I'm allowed.
And I'm just saying that I did send in an amendment that said explore. So if we're going to do this for everyone from now on, that's fine. Thank you.
It's not a point of information. Okay, Councillor Fry, please continue.
Yeah, so just no secret that I'm not super happy with the process, and I think that the public hearing, that what we've heard from folks, and that they're not seeing the actual more refined built form in this. So I want the opportunity for this to come back to council, and I understand that that is possible, but I've severed that out also so that we're including in that exploration rather than refinement. The notion of excess parking, because the outright parking recommendation is for 37 units, and I believe this is providing 56 units, which, we're in a housing emergency. We're also in a climate emergency, and I feel that the excess parking is not something that I find supportable. I will say that there's lots to support in this building, but the excess parking is not really one of them for me.
Okay, do we have a seconder for this? Councillor Kirby-Young. Great. And I have a queue. Councillor Dejanova on the queue.
Well, instead of just calling out point of order, I thought I'd wait to see, Mr. Mayor, this along with, I understood the intent of Councillor Dominato's amendment, and with the word explorer could have supported this, but in further consideration and taking a look through Appendix B, I think that as Ms. McNeil had acknowledged, this is already being done. And that's why we have the development permit process. So I would ask you to consider if this is out of order for the reasons that it's redundant and it's already being considered. We have these checks and balances through the staff process, and sometimes things don't even pass through the development permit board if they don't meet those conditions.
So you're asking for the amendment
ruling
to the amendment, or the whole thing?
I think first the amendment and the whole thing. I mean, maybe we might need a recess, but I'm not sure if you want to consider them together.
We'll need a recess, so I'll actually have to talk to legal about this, just
move for
with the clerk. Yep, so if everybody's okay, I'll take a short break and get back to you as soon as I can.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, council, I'm ready to deliver the ruling. Sorry? Oh. Yeah, that's what the ride hailing will do. Okay, council, just going to call us back to order here. Oh, sorry. Council, can I call you back to order here, please? Thank you. Great. Okay, so in terms of the ruling, both of these are in order, but I think it's in giving the reasons why they're in order. I think I will turn it over to staff that will not only explain why it's in order, but also what will happen if these amendments are the amendment and the amendment to the amendment are passed. So I can turn it over to staff to give us a sense of what will happen and what won't happen if these are passed. So I've ruled them in order, and if you could explain.
Could you put up the amendment back on the screen for us? Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so just for a clarifying point around the addition of for final council approval, just want to remind council that as a matter of protocol, you do have the form of development that comes back to you post enactment, post public hearing, and prior to the final sign off in the development permit. That is a form of development report. It's a one-pager. You generally end up with a list of addresses, and it's an approval process. So this does come back to you in that form. It doesn't reopen the public hearing or the debate. It's simply giving you the chance to see the final version of this that's gone through the development permit board or the director of planning, and what the ultimate building will look like as it moves towards the building permit stage. And with that, I think we see this as in line with the protocol that's already established and doesn't generate any new process.
Great. So that's the ruling. So these are in order. I have Councillor Dejanova. I'm sorry I let your clock run, but yeah. Sure. Go ahead.
Anyways, my clock, I don't think should be running. I was wondering if you would be able to share with us at council. We talk about months and years that a project can wait before it moves forward. Would this add a different scope to that that could potentially, I mean, that's why we have the development permit board. But in making my decision for this, I need to know, is this going to hold up timelines? You know, I hear Councillor Fry talking about, would be great if we had more short kind of type programs with development permit, you know, and rezonings and a way to make sure that that carries itself through. But I'm wondering, will this in fact possibly slow down the process? And if so, how likely is it?
I think the short answer is no. This is in line with what you're already doing about looking at the form of development. It's in line with the intent of the conditions in Appendix B. The only addition is this calls out the intent to look at opportunities for the public amenity, the children's play space, which exists today. We've taken a look at the location of that. It's partly on city land, partly on private land. With the retention of the trees, that space will be protected. So we see a way forward with this, and effectively, it does not impede the progress of the process moving forward to enactment and to develop permit in the normal churn of events, essentially.
Okay.
Thanks. Point of information.
Thanks.
Satisfied?
Yes.
Point of information, Councillor Dominato.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just want to clarify what I heard from staff, just so I'm going to reflect it back, is that what you're saying is with Councillor Fry's amendment.
Amendment to the amendment?
It's been a long day, long few days.
It hasn't actually. Go ahead.
And with the amendment to the amendment around final council approval, you're saying that is not creating a new process, that in fact we will see that through the form of development that comes to us at a later date.
That is correct.
And so you're comfortable with that? Because the question I had in my mind is, are we creating a new process on the fly in the middle of a public hearing? But you're saying no.
No, just as a reminder for council that you do see the form of development in the form of a one-page report after the development permit has gone through the revisions and the applicant has resubmitted all of that. And that naturally comes back to you for approval. So in the spirit of this, we see this in line with that process.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Thanks. Councillor Dominato, then, did you want to speak?
Oh, I'm still on.
Do you want to still?
I do want to speak to it, but I have one more point of information. Right now, it says that staff work with the applicant to further explore, which I mean, I'll just leave that one, even though I'd sent
Move
that
to
in.
the question, please.
The building massing height and excess parking. I understand this from reading over this. This meets policy. So how can we call something excess if it meets our policy?
I think
So
that's
I'd like to.
splitting hairs.
Is it?
Yes,
Okay. So it's fair to say excess parking.
I would say.
Okay.
Great.
That's fine.
Thanks very much. Councillor Dominato.
Very briefly, given the additional information we've received from staff, I'm happy to support the amendment to the amendment.
Thanks very much. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Thank you. I actually really appreciate this, and I will support it. I will say, because I think we need to be really responsive to the community, and I think we're trying to balance securing community license and ensuring that we listen. We don't have these public hearings be a sham, and we have lots of people come in, and we've had about 90-something speakers, and it's been a long process for everybody. And then the council often votes through a report anyway, and the community goes away feeling dejected and they don't feel heard. But at the other hand, we have to balance it with the fact, are we meeting on policy? And we're trying to meet some really critical and tough goals of delivering more accessible units for people in terms of price, and that we're getting more rental into the community. And I think that this strikes a little bit of a balance. I hope, and I really want to state for the record, I don't want this to become a precedent that all of a sudden councillors say, aha, this is a tool and I can do this in a public hearing, and it comes back and then we're pulling them out into that next process, and there's a whole sort of subsequent dialogue around that. So I think it should be used very judiciously. And not as a regular occurrence. But I think this is one of those situations where we really can demonstrate that we're looking to try to find the right balance, and we've heard the community concerns. In response to the comments around excess parking, I think there's a perspective on that, certainly from a sustainability point of view, but I also note that parking was actually increased over what the developer or the applicant had originally proposed in response to community feedback. So, and recognizing the sort of additional people there and the lane and sort of, the desire to kind of have that contained as opposed to on street. So I really want to make sure those principles adhere, that we're not undoing some of the amendments or the sort of adjustments that have been made that the community heard, because I think the intent is to build on where there has been some movement and some response to the community, as opposed to taking some of those components down. But having said that, I will support it because I think, again, this provides an opportunity to sort of, and I hate to say this, I don't want to suggest this, but this just may be an applicant at a moment in time, because we're in the first approvals around a MERT process that is a bit of a, I don't want to say guinea pig, but a catalyst or an opportunity to demonstrate what this could be. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. So I think we have to look at it in that context, as opposed to that council is always going to intervene, and hopefully it'll help shape the process earlier on, so we don't have to do this, and we'll see this kind of more symbiotic coming together with the community and the policy by the time it actually gets to public hearing. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Fry.
Yeah, thank you. And and thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young, for really teasing out. The intent of this amendment to the amendment was really to articulate for folks that there is a process, and that we are doing our due diligence, and that this is how the process goes, and that they can have some confidence that there is the degrees of approval that come with this, and that's not just over and done with, and that these recommendations in B will be considered and addressed, and that's part of the process. And certainly, and I didn't want to call a point of order earlier, but with regard to the councillor's concern about the excessive use of the term excess for parking, I would point to page 12 of the policy report, which does in fact describe exceeding the parking law bylaw requirement of 37 spaces in describing 56 vehicle spaces. So I just wanted to make clarification that that is not an excessive use of the word excess on my part. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dejanova.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I know my time was running all the way through, because all I've done is ask points of information so far.
Go on.
So what I will say is I'm happy to see the word explore. It doesn't really matter who put it in there. I do think that it's really important that we make sure that we're looking, as we move forward on this, about the deliverables. So if we truly want affordable housing to be a part of our city, I think that we have to look at the timelines for that too. It's not just that we sit here and we approve something and one day it will magically appear. There's a whole process and there's a cost associated to that. I've heard from people in the nonprofit community even who are financing land for, to the tune of $58,000, $60,000, $70,000 in interest. Every month if the process goes beyond what they thought it would. And that's really hurting vulnerable and marginalized people who could be benefiting from those units of housing and families. In this case, I'm fine with this, but to other councillors' comments, this tool shouldn't be used. I think this tool should be used whenever there's a council member who really feels that this adds to, the process for them. I don't think that it should be used just, that there should be some that it is or isn't allowed for. I think that it's important that we all have the option to move forward with this if we feel that there needs to be that extra level of oversight. I also, though, am aware, and the reason that I will support this is because Ms. McNeil has clarified that for final council approval, that means through the administrative motion process, which is how we see these come back to us for approval. Usually it's not a bylaw, it's an administrative motion that comes forward in our council meetings. So I don't see this as another council meeting that we're going to sit through, and I want to be very transparent and open and diligent about talking about that, because to some people who read this today, they might think that it means something else. So I wanted to go on the record. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be supporting this.
Thank you. Councillor Bly.
Thank you. I'll keep my comments brief. As Councillor Kirby-Young really did a fantastic job of teasing out exactly what I see to be the benefit of this amendment, but also mindful to not necessarily become the norm of how we tackle some of these more challenging rezonings. But, one thing that stood out to me and how I will be supporting it is around the opposition to spot rezonings that we heard from a number of speakers. And this, the question is not whether or not this large site on the edge of this RT zone, it's not about whether or not it would be rezoned. It will be rezoned. And we are wrestling right now with a blanket rezoning for low transition density areas where this is going to come up again. So, right now I'm actually grateful that this is a spot rezoning because it does give us more influence to be able to hear from the speakers and influence however this final decision will land. And if it was a blanket rezoning, we wouldn't have perhaps the same influence. So although we struggle with spot rezonings, and I can understand why, the alternative is not to not rezone at all. And that, I think, is the thing that we need to keep paying attention to. We have a less than 1% vacancy rate. We need rental. We have overwhelming might be an extreme word, but we have a lot of supply in strata condo, and to think that this is what this could be without a rezoning. So I appreciate this because it does give us final input into that administrative motion that's going to come back. And in this circumstance, I will be supporting it.
Thank you. Councillor Weep.
Yeah, I'll also be supporting. And I do like that maybe we relook at the process when it does come back, that we get maybe a little more information that recognizes how it met conditions. I think that a lot of times we do see those form developments have a really small one-pager, and I think on projects that do have a lot of conditions, it would be helpful for us to see how it met those conditions moving forward, so that process gives us more certainty that we are delivering the projects that the citizens want. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That's it for speakers, so I can call the vote on the amendment to the amendment. And that is passed with no opposition. Move back to the amendment. Councillor Fry, anything else?
I'm good, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Dejanova on the amended amendment?
Nope. That's all.
Thank you. Councillor Boyle?
Are we on the main motion?
Nope, we're on the amended amendment. Nope. Okay, Councillor Dominato? on the amended
Thanks,
amendment?
Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief in light of time. Just to say that I brought forward the amendment because I think it was very clear we had a lot of speakers come and speak to us with respect to this proposal, and wanting to be responsive to the concerns we heard around massing, height, design, style, facades, and that that it really articulates that we will have our staff look at that with the applicant, as well as responding to the concerns about the loss of the church. We have, as Councillor Carr noted, we have no control over that, but to look at children's play space and public space, I think it merits looking at. So obviously supportive for this.
Thanks very much. That's it for speakers, so I'll call a vote on the amended amendment. That's passed with no one in opposition. Go back to the question queue. Councillor Dominato, anything else? We're on the main queue. Now speaking to the amended motion.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. We're speaking to the overall recommendations. I want to thank all of the residents who did come out and speak over the last couple of weeks. I know some of them are here today. Really appreciate hearing the different perspectives. And, this is challenging. I often feel conflicted with projects like this because of we are talking about change and change to neighborhoods. I live in a different neighborhood, but I am seeing that change happen as well in my own neighborhood in response to the fact that we have a huge need for housing, but particularly in certain areas, the market rental housing as well as affordable housing. And what I appreciate about, and I recognize this is a pilot, but with the MERP program, that you do have that mix of market rental, which we need, but as well as delivering the moderate income rental units, 30,000 to 80,000 income range. And essentially that affordability is derived from having that mix of market in there. And it is a unique, and certainly we'll probably see after we've had a number of these projects, we'll be able to evaluate, and I know our staff will be doing that. Does this work? Does it not? Essentially, we do have a vacancy control component to this. That is also unique. But it does address our housing needs. And to the residents who came and spoke, you're right, you do have already a wide range and mix of housing in Kitsilano, in that neighborhood. But this is changed. I know staff talked about, in the context of the program, that the large sort of corner lot, and that was one of the reasons it was identified potentially as a fit. I think there's some other benefits to this, is that it's a walkable neighborhood. There's a lot of amenities in that area. There's close to public transit. We know many people don't have vehicles today, are choosing not to have vehicles. They're using public transit, using car-to-go, although we heard that car-to-go may be shutting down now in North America. But there is, I think we need to think about our neighborhoods in that context as well. I appreciate the fact that built into the project is amenity space, and so that helps build that sort of context of socialization. We do hear often from residents that in a larger city, people feel socially isolated. So when you build that into a building, that does create a space where people can congregate, socialize. Councillor, we've talked about the green standards, and I think that's also a positive benefit to this. But while I want to acknowledge the concerns of residents about this change, I was asked a question last week about, well, what if this, the church is gone, it's sold. What would we do if under the RTA zoning, what could be there? And basically staff indicated to me that would likely be duplex, or possibly you could get 10 strata units on there, 3-story, and that wouldn't necessarily address the rental housing need that we have in the city today. And I'm running out of time. So in closing, I will be supporting this project, and I hope that through the amendments we've added, I think those add some stronger conditions to the project in a response to some of the community needs. I recognize it will not address all the concerns of residents, but I do think we need to be shifting and responding to the fact that we have a changing population.
Thank you. Councillor Swanson.
This thing is very invasive. So I think what we have to do here, what I always like to do, is look at who gets what. So in this case, the city is getting 13 units at moderate rent. not low rent, because 1/3 of renters can't afford them. And they still have vacancy control, which is good. But according to a recent CCPA study, even shelter rate housing, where people pay only $375 a month for rent, pays for itself in just 30 years. And these units, the MERP units, they'll produce 2.5 times as much rent as that. The city also gets 50 units of pretty expensive rental that could go for as much as $4,000 a month and will be hundreds of dollars a month above what most current rents in the area are with no vacancy control. One speaker told us that the median rents in the area are $1,125 for a studio and $2,000 for a 2-bed, way lower than the $1,739 for a studio and $3,500 for a 3-bed in the proposed development. So what does the developer get? Developer gets more than triple the density, increasing the value of the property and nearby property that will probably see taxes and rents go up. A DCL waiver of almost $100,000 per moderate income unit, which is even more than the city gives to nonprofits under the CHIP program to increase affordability for low-income people, and the CAC waiver that we don't know how much, because I guess the expensive rental is considered an amenity. What does the community get? They're mourning the loss of the church. If the church had decided not to sell to the developer, but to build non-market housing on the site, maybe with some community amenities, that would have been ideal. They could have had low-cost financing, they have the land, they wouldn't need a profit. So the units could have been truly affordable, and the city could have given them the density and everyone would benefit. But that didn't happen, even though it's a model that I'd like to see happening, so we're stuck with this. So 2 things are important for me. One is, if the city gives, the city needs to get affordability. We're giving density, we're giving DCL waivers, we're giving CAC waivers, and we're not getting anything near the affordability we need with this project. Yes, okay, the other thing that's important to me is gentrification. Yes, we may get 13, or we will get, if it goes ahead, 13 moderate rental units, but how many surrounding moderate rental units will we lose because of the gentrifying impact of the 50 expensive units? One speaker noted that the percent of low-income people in kits is declining. If we had vacancy control and enough social housing units, this wouldn't be a big deal for me. I'd say go for it. But when we give a developer extra density to put in expensive housing on a site, all of my experience tells me that this raises property values, taxes, and rents. And because we don't have vacancy control, rents go up. I also want to say I think it's significant that so many people associated with the development industry showed up to support the project. That means, I'm not blaming them for this is their job, but it means that these kinds of projects are profitable for them. And it means that we're making housing decisions based on what's profitable for people, rather than based on housing as a right, rather than based on housing as a need. And MERP isn't going to get us out of this situation. I think we need to shift away from MERP more towards nonprofit. And if we approve this, I think we're giving away too much for too little. The giveaway should go to non-market where we can really increase the affordability. So I'll be voting against it.
Thank you. Councillor Bly.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I also would, of course, like to thank the many speakers that came out to speak both in favor and also against this project. And that takes a lot of time, and we know that we've been hearing from the community around this particular project. So it's been one that
I've considered and read all of the feedback and letters and concerns that we've heard. And also want to acknowledge staff for really working hard through this process as well to address some of these issues. And also, we've amended this, and we don't often amend these types of applications. So there's been a real appetite, I think, from this council to hear from speakers and do our very best to infuse this application with amendments that can reflect a better outcome for those who have serious concerns about the project itself. So I think that is all part of this process. We've heard words like grieving, mourning. It was very clear that this church provided a space for the community that goes well beyond what this process is about. And I don't know how to answer that. I don't know how to address it except to acknowledge that I really heard that. And the struggle in this is that in order for a builder to buy land, someone has to sell it to them. And the church needed to sell the land. So this is what they chose to do. This land is extremely expensive. And so there are maybe 100 ways that we would like to see different kinds of housing on this land, but it's not viable here. And I think, I do think we have to be careful not to chalk it up to developer greed or profit. There's an economics profile to what we can do with land that we see in different ways. And there's also a very broad spectrum of that profile across the city. So that's why we're not seeing as much of this development happening on the west side. And we hear criticism from the public around that as well. So, I recognize the amenity space and I don't have an answer for that except to acknowledge that is a very real loss for this community. This is around vacancy. We know that vacancy rates are below 1%. This is not a debate about whether or not our population is going to grow by a certain amount of numbers. This is for people who live here right now. I predict this building, if approved, will be full in short order. And so that's not waiting for population growth. That's actually because we have a need that exists in the city right now. Adjacent neighbors have been impacted. And I also really recognize that those speakers that came that live directly beside this property are going to be the greatest ones impacted if it goes ahead. And we also hear those similar concerns every time we're here looking at projects, no matter where in the city, that the adjacent neighbors will be the most significantly impacted by change. That's a reality, and it's not an easy one to swallow, but it actually is just the case. And we wrestle with that. I wrestle with that as well. I think it's important to recognize that there's no displacement here, 0. And we don't often see that. And that's really part of a challenge that we're faced with. And it has to be acknowledged that if just across the street in the RT4, there would be displacement. There would be buildings that have 20 people that maybe if that site sells and they want to build something bigger, there'll be many people that will be homeless that right now pay very affordable rents. So we have to wrestle with that as well. Townhomes wouldn't pencil out. It's a great option, but it's like social housing. It wouldn't pencil out, and that's the reality of the economics of this particular site. The last thing I'll say is there's a policy expert. Our job here in this hearing process is to wrestle with, or is to look at the policy, and does this project fit the policy? And the policy says, with strict criteria, a larger site with an RT zone, existing precedent of larger buildings, and this one in particular is on the very, very eastern edge of the RT Kits neighborhood. It would be different if it was even 2 blocks in or even 1 block in, but it's actually on the edge. So across the street are big buildings. So although for those that have been living in the neighborhood for 30 years, this is a really unimaginable change. But if you walk into that neighborhood, and I lived in that neighborhood.
Just at 5.
Okay, so I think it's really important that we look at that. My only last comment is during the citywide plan, I spoke to young people at a high school, and they said that they would trade space for community in the future. That's the citywide planning influence those are the people that are going to live here. And so I just hope that that's what they get if this is approved,
Thanks.
that anyone that moves into this house will get that community because they want that more than anything else.
Thanks very much. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. So I'd also like to thank speakers and staff who came to speak to this. There was a speaker who quoted Dr. Martin Luther King in speaking to this project, and so I went back and read that full speech and just wanted to speak to it. MLK was fighting racial segregation and economic inequality and wrote his letter from a Birmingham jail when he was imprisoned after participating in nonviolent demonstrations against segregation. The full letter, I, of course, think is worth reading, but the larger segment of what was quoted was this: I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. So what stands out to me, my sense of this project, is that the injustice in this situation isn't that the more affordable units are on the ground floor. It's that so many renters and low-income residents across our city have been limited to living in basement suites with insecure tenure. The injustice isn't that a neighborhood may get more neighbors, but that new neighbors have been excluded from so much of our city for so long. Our history of zoning as a city, like many other cities, has been about exclusion and about protecting a certain type of character over welcoming those who need a home. We know this, and it needs to change. So we heard from a number of neighbors an alternative suggestion of a more affordable building with childcare. As we've heard, the market wouldn't build that sort of building. But if we want those types of buildings, we could build them together, publicly funded through tax dollars, municipally, provincially, and federally, which I'm all for. I'd love to do that. Let's do that. It would require a lot of advocacy. So I hope we will see those who feel that this building and others aren't affordable enough show up to support more deeply affordable public and nonprofit housing in this neighborhood and elsewhere. In the meantime, this building is 5 stories. There's no displacement. It's zero emission, and it provides secure rental housing for moderate income families in a beautiful neighborhood within walking distance to fantastic neighborhood amenities. I know this neighborhood well, and I have spent time worshiping and breaking bread in that church. I think the new building looks great. I think it will be a well-loved and meaningful home for many people who will add to the vibrancy and character of this great neighborhood. And I hope they will feel welcome. Housing is a right, and these new neighbors have every right to be there. So I will support it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fry.
Yeah, I will be supporting this project. There's really lots to like about this project. Right off the get-go, the pet-friendly component really jumped out at me because I know that that's so sorely lacking in rental housing in our city, and rental housing is sorely lacking in our city. And I'm supportive of the premise behind the MERP because I do think that the idea of vacancy control and really targeting real affordable rents is critical to dealing with our housing affordability crisis. I don't think MERP goes far enough, and I'm really glad that we unanimously supported an amendment to the rental incentive proposal that came before us a couple of weeks ago, and we unanimously got behind the idea of exploring how we can better support non-market housing. And I think that is ultimately the way we need to go because we can't rely on market alone. I do want to highlight, though, that I do want to just name the frustrations with this process. I lost track of how many people referred to this building as Soviet-style architecture. And from our conversations, we recognized that that's not the final architecture. That's not the final design proposal. But when we submit it as for rezoning, we're kind of using a placeholder, and people look at it and they go, "Oh my God, look, it's Soviet-style architecture. It's all boxy," and we're not actually getting the information to the people that they need to see to make informed decisions. I think that we've added some thoughtful amendments and recommendations to this. I'm confident that staff will be working with the applicant to address some of the concerns that we've heard. I'm not confident that we'll manage to retain as many trees as has been optimistically referred to, but I would be pleasantly surprised if, in fact, we do retain the 24, the 28 trees on site. But I do think that we, looking forward, need to really reconsider how we get through this rezoning process and give people real information so they can make informed decisions, because I don't think we're doing it right in the current incarnation. So that's just my sort of critique of the process. But I will be supporting this, and I'm glad to see affordable rental housing getting built in the City of Vancouver.
Thanks very much, Councillor Hardwick.
So last week in public hearing, I voted in favor of 2 MERP projects because they both ticked all the boxes. This application does not. So why? Well, first, location, location, location. This location is not on an arterial, but rather is situated a couple of blocks off 4th Avenue in a stable, mixed neighborhood consisting of heritage and character houses, together with duplexes, walk-up apartments, and other multifamily dwellings. It is not a large site. This is a spot rezoning, and there are better locations throughout the city, including in Kitsilano, for development of this scope. Just so you know, my mother's side of the family has lived in Kitsilano since the turn of the last century, and Kits was always considered the east side of the west side. It was reflecting its working class inhabitants. And housing has changed over the decades. My grandparents, for example, the house that they built after World War I and raised 4 kids in was demolished in favor of a walk-up apartment in the 1960s. After World War II, a house they had on 12th was converted into a rooming house. Change is constant, and Kitsilano has historically been able to repurpose structures to respond to the evolving needs of its citizens. Neighborliness. This is inconsistent with the neighborhood in terms of height and massing. And MERP provides for development of materials where appropriate. And this is clearly subjective. And this is, from my perspective, on this basis, this development would be disqualified. And for whatever reason, trees seem to be more important than neighborliness. This hits close to home. My daughter and her partner lived nearby at First and Balsam in a 1-bedroom 1970s walk-up. And they recently had a baby, and they needed 2-bedroom. And as a plumber and a bar manager, they could never afford the rents in this building. As I've stated before, I question the merits of this Housing Vancouver strategy and the MERP spinoff, in particular the veracity of the so-called targets. Our population has been growing at 1% a year over the last 3 decades, and household size has decreased down to 2.2 people per dwelling. And yet, we see projections or targets that are based on values rather than evidence in making our decisions about what we do. Good governance means good management, and our job is to manage, not promote development. So why are we promoting development to the detriment of our residents? This is misguided. Are 13 units worth hurting this neighborhood? If the city was serious about providing affordable housing, it would incentivize more secondary suites and infill development through gentle density. Finally, I ask the question, who do we represent? We are elected by the people who live in Vancouver to represent them. We're not elected to represent special interests, and that includes the property development industry. Our constituents are concerned about the future and making room for the next generation, for our children and children's children. But that doesn't mean that we need to put a big box in the middle of it it's designed to maximize FSR. And this is why we need real neighborhood planning, which is what this citywide planning process was supposed to be. So obviously, I am not in support of this for the reasons that I've stated: lack of neighborliness, wrong size and massing for the neighborhood, and ultimately disregarding the large number of people that came out to tell us that this was going to disrupt their neighborhood. Thank you.
Councillor Kirby-Young.
Thank you. I've actually really enjoyed this process, and I don't mean in the sense of being entertaining. I mean in the sense of being informative, because I think it's been a really important discussion around how to advance policy in a way that is respectful of the feedback that comes forward from our community groups. And I do want to thank all the speakers. It's almost the holiday season, I hear. Out there, I hear signs of it. People kind of tell me this. I haven't seen a lot of it myself, but I know that it's a lot to come out and actually spend time giving your feedback, and we really appreciate it. And I think the council has taken it to heart. I do want to, before I make a couple of closing comments, address a couple of points that I heard from some of my fellow councillors, and I reject some of the notions when it comments, for example, that taxes and rents usually go up near purpose-built rental. And I think we've had that question of staff before related to similar projects and situations, and we've kind of been assured that usually, no, they don't. That's not sort of the driver and the factor. And also in terms of, comments like, it's not enough lower income units, so we shouldn't do it. Well, that's actually exactly why we should do it, because we need a spectrum of housing. And this is 63 units altogether. It's not just about the 13 moderate income. That's really a critical component, but it's also about the other 50 that we also desperately need in the city because we are short and we have a really low vacancy rate. So that's workforce housing. That's people that can afford, hopefully, with projects like this, to actually come in and stay in the city and have an option because they can't buy. I want to sort of really acknowledge that one of the things that was sort of stood out for me, and I think a lot of the heart in this, was what the community feels they've lost. And that was around the community space. And in terms of how much it brought people together, and it created a sense of belonging and connection, whether it was with the kids that were at daycare, and it was the church space, and it was how the space was rented and used by other neighborhood groups. And I think that's really important for council to take away because, you may have heard, we were working on a budget yesterday, little small thing. And a large part of that is around capital, which is trying to ensure that these community amenities contribute to livability of the city and that we make sure that we're pacing and we're not losing those. And I think to hear that and have, how important that is really critically and underscores it. I'll say a couple other things that may not necessarily be popular. There was one speaker that came in and it kind of made me think about West Side Story. I think he sort of likened that and evoked that analogy, and it made you think of sort of rival gangs that are battling it out for turf. And I actually don't think that's what we should be doing. We should be figuring out processes that help people shape what that turf looks like and how we share it. And it was interesting to me to see who came out to speak. And obviously the folks that are most impacted, as Councillor Bly mentioned, such as the immediate neighbours. But then it was also referenced by one of my fellow councillors, well, it was the development industry. And of course you're going to have some folks that come out and proponents. But who stood out for me that came out that we heard as well was the young people. The 28-year-old female renter who was married, who lived near UBC, who was professing this is the kind of housing that she needed to stay in the neighborhood, and she loved the neighborhood. And we heard from folks like that as to how important it was, and we do need to be conscious and make room for people. And I recall as well a comment from another speaker who said, we can't have affordable housing on expensive land. We can't have affordable housing on expensive land. Well, all land in Vancouver is expensive, and if we subscribe to that, that means that we're going to create divisions, and there's been some rhetoric and some language used around this, like ghettos or enclaves versus other areas, and that's incredibly dangerous and divisive. But I think that we have to try, and I think we need to find ways to do that. Otherwise, we're going to have a segregated city, and I don't think that that's how people want to live and build together. So having said all of that and a lot of those comments, I will reiterate, I think we need a spectrum of housing. I was quite challenged and uncomfortable about feeling about supporting this project given the level of opposition from the neighborhood, although I think that some of the characterization comes from fear and change and concern, and I don't think some of the rhetoric was helpful, but a lot of the emotion was really genuine, and the feedback needed to be respected. And I think through this process, council has done that by looking at opportunities to amend the building form and to be more sensitive about the design and to, sort of have that really inform the process. And I think that staff have taken that to heart, and I think that they will work to move forward. And I think, so for those reasons, I'm going to support it, but I really encourage all the parties to take advantage of this opportunity to showcase how a MERT project can work really well and how the community feedback can be incorporated and how we can come together and end up with a better product, because then hopefully when we get these things, there'll be more community goodwill behind them. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And as the mover of the motion, Councillor Dejanova does have up to 5 minutes to speak at the end.
Try not to take 5 minutes, Mr. Mayor. considering this has been amended since I first spoke to it, I will say that I appreciate the amendments. Although I had some concern as to what this would do for the timeline, I appreciate staff answering that. I also wanted to say to some of the statements and comments that have been made in debate and decision, neighborly and a neighborhood. I'm just very aware that we were here recently talking about the empty homes tax, and that we want more people in our neighborhoods, and we want people to be able to have space to work and live, or close to their work to live in the city of Vancouver. And many people are priced out of that. They choose to travel into the city of Vancouver for work, but we aren't going to be neighborly or have neighborhoods if we don't start with complete communities. And that's for everyone. That includes the next generation. And I'm very aware and happy to be, I think that it's important to have all ages and all perspectives. But as the first millennial elected last term to Vancouver City Council, I think about the importance of planning for the future. And there's no way that I could have ever afforded to have purchased the home that my parents brought me home from the hospital to on the west side of Vancouver. Although it was a little home at the time and it still stands there, there's no way it's millions and millions of dollars more in price. I'm sure if it even was up for sale, then I would have be able to afford. So I think we have to look at, and I appreciate the comments about affordability, but we have to start trying to make things more affordable in some sense. And this does meet our criteria from our, very thoughtful staff across many departments and the policies that we've considered with the moderate income rental pilot project. And again, it's a pilot project. We're going to learn throughout this. I appreciate Councillor Wiebe, your amendment. I think that it's really important that we don't have any difference or differentiation if possible. If it doesn't come down to subsidy, I'm sure some people might like their rent paid or a little more of a rental discount than to be on a higher floor. That's fine, but then give them that option. I think it's important that we don't stigmatize people that way. And I've never been for ghettoized housing. I've always thought that housing with dignity comes with when you close the door, no one knows your situation behind that door. And I also think that that comes down to pets as well and pet friendly. And the reason I say that is I actually met a little girl quite recently, and she had talked about wanting a dog, and I said, "Oh, do you have a pet? Do you have any pets?" And she said, "No, we rent, and it would be very difficult for us to be able to do that." And it broke my heart because there's another class struggle that shouldn't come to be. There shouldn't be a difference between a little girl who her parents are homeowners, so that she's able to have a dog, versus somebody who isn't because the family's afraid that they wouldn't be able to keep the dog if they were evicted, or at that rental home that they're living in, that they can't have one right now. Also think that it's important to note what Mr. Mortensen said, and he is known as an expert in urban planning and land economics also. And Councillor Hardwick, I know that's very important to you, people's backgrounds in that. So
just a minute.
For him saying that it's not a tower and it provides real affordable housing, this will house first responders, nurses, teachers, servers, clerks, and retail staff. And as someone once said to me, if we don't start somewhere, we will get nowhere. And I feel that that's a perfect statement for affordable housing in our city. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I see no other speakers, but before I move to the vote, I just wanted to bring to council's attention that last night, a speaker from last night has sent in correspondence to all of council. This correspondence will not be considered as part of the public hearing process as per our procedure, so I would ask you to disregard this email that, of course, was not included in information that the public could see or consider. Okay? Okay, great. So I'm going to call the vote on this now. And I'm going to read out the names in opposition. Councillor Hardwick, Councillor Swanson, and Councillor Carr in opposition, but this does pass. Thank you very much, Council. Haven't heard much from me because in this chairing position, I'm not really supposed to comment on the matters as they move through council, and rather to chair fairly. I have been staying fairly quiet, but I would like to congratulate you on a lot of hard work that you've done, put a lot of hours and weeks into considering both the budget and this latest round of applications. I'd like to thank staff for all their work, and of course that includes the staff in the clerk's office and under the city manager, as well as the staff in my office. I'd like to thank the public for coming out and participating, and I think is one of the best and most rigorous ways that we make public decisions in this country. It doesn't always go the way people want, but I do feel like the process has a great integrity and is something to be very proud of. So with that, before I call for a motion to adjourn, I would just like to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, and I do look forward to seeing you in January, where we get to do this all over again in 2020. So thanks again. If I could have a motion to adjourn, Councillor Hardwick, seconded by Councillor Bly. All in favor? Any opposed? Nope, that's good. Thank you very much, and we're adjourned.